Here we go.
Sometimes we need to slow it down. Take a look around and breathe. 'Cause these times go by so very fast. Moments never last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Breathe. Sometimes when you feel you've had enough, living is just too tough. Just breathe. 'Cause you'll regret when these days are past. Your friend just seen your last. Just breathe.
They don't show it.
Breathe in,
show
breathe
it all.
out.
They're hidden.
Quiet, be
So,
still, don't
mine was
shout.
because they have no.
Love is what it's all
yours is
about. Just breathe.
No, it's in there because there's much moisture away from your foot.
Breathe in, breathe out. Love is what it's all about. Be quiet, be still, don't shout. Just breathe. Just love.
Return these.
Just love. Just love.
One of these, and just return this one.
Good evening and welcome to the Just Love Show. It's another
Hello.
beautiful night here in Northern California, and before we get to my guest tonight, want to talk a little bit about something that first of all, we got to do what we do every show. How could I forget? Take a deep breath, breathe in all the things you have to be grateful for and thankful for. And before I get to my guest tonight, who I'm so excited to have on the show tonight from the Whirling Rainbow Foundation, I want to talk about something that I'm seeing and hearing from a lot of people I know, and you probably know as well. There's this general sense of unease and discomfort that people are experiencing. They're not really sure why. They're feeling like they're sort of going through the motions in life right now. And people who are somewhat spiritually aware that this is because we're in the middle of shifting to an entirely new paradigm or returning to rhythm. With nature, with oneness, becoming something new, or even if you want to look at it this way, something old again. But there's, from across all fields, when I talk to people, there's a sense that something's happening. They're not sure what, and it's affecting them on a soul level. They're feeling sad, they're feeling lonely, and I just want everyone out there to know you're not alone, and this is okay. You have to look at it this way. When a snake is shedding its skin, there's a certain amount of discomfort before that new, beautiful, bright, vibrant skin is revealed. And that's what we're going through. We're going through a shedding process. We're shedding our old skin. We're becoming something new. What that new is, I can't even quite imagine yet. But I want to read, as we do every show, something that I've written and then followed up again with a much greater, wiser mind than mine. The massive contradiction, the weight of hypocrisy is growing moment by moment, exponentially, between what we thought made sense, what we think now makes sense, and what we sense we are becoming. As the existing paradigm shifts to a new experience beyond energy and matter, as the perceived foundation of the experience, to one of pure information, the foundational building blocks of all experiences, few, if any, can scarcely imagine what this new will be. And when the mass of our contradiction, the weight of our hypocrisies are so great that it feels like the gravity of a black hole ripping apart your heart and your mind, your consciousness screaming, "Wake up," to the experience transforming around you, it is then we will begin to accept that all we thought we knew made sense, makes sense no more or ever will again. This is what our blessed awareness is for. We have been given the gift of being the witness bearer to our transcendence. And when we finally again understand, when things appear to again to make sense, Our ascension to the new experience will be complete. We will be spirit, soul, one in love. But these, my friends, are just feeble words, scrawled meanderings, attempting to explain in vain the now unexplainable, to know without real hope of now knowing what is the is to come, just as we cannot fathom in any way the is that was is before. And then here's something from Tolstoy that I thought supported this idea. If, then, I were asked for the most important advice I could give, that which I consider to be the most useful to the men of our century, I should simply say, in the name of God, stop a moment, cease your work, look around you. Leonard Tolstoy. And then one final thing before I introduce my guest, and this is actually from her website, and I love this. It's the Whirling Rainbow Prophecy. Among the Navajo and Hopi, the Whirling Rainbow is a prophecy and a promise of peace for all nations, and all people through understanding the races are one. The Whirling Rainbow is a vision to unite people of the 5 sacred colors, all creeds working together for the good of the whole. When all the pathways to wholeness are respected by all cultures, the prophecy of the Whirling Rainbow will be realized. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce, with great honor and respect, my guest this evening, White Eagle, medicine woman from the Whirling Rainbow Foundation. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show. I really appreciate that, Kip.
Well, I'm really, truly thrilled to have you on, and I really enjoyed the conversation we had a couple weeks ago. And I just want to start off by before White Eagle Medicine Woman, at the earliest stages of your journey, how did this all begin, and where did it begin for you?
Oh my goodness, what part of the journey? I think we're all beginning the journey when we enter planet Earth. So I had many chapters of teaching and touring before we started the Whirling Rainbow Foundation. I ran a wilderness empowerment school for women to reconnect with the earth. And I did that for 20 years before I started this. So I had about 50,000 women through that program, from young girls and teaching them about the empowerment of who they are through their connection to Mother Earth. And then it transitioned right around 1999. I began to have more and more visions with the grandmothers, what I call the grandmothers, and their indigenous grandmothers from all around the world that have come to me in dreams since I was a small child. And there was some guidance in those dreams that I was going to be sort of changing what I was doing and traveling more around the world with a drum, a very large crystal inlaid drum that was a symbol of the heartbeat of all nations. But they kept talking about its particular frequency, and I didn't really understand that then because I didn't know we were going to be putting crystal into this drum, that it would be sort of a beacon during a very changing time on the planet when people would be confused about their direction, about who they are, about where they were going, and that this very heartbeat, which is the same sound that we heard in our mother's womb for 9 months, giving us a sense of where we came from the spirit world to earth, that we would need to hear this again and repeatedly. And I think that the wave was starting to happen all around the world when in the year 2000, the millennium was really celebrated all over the world via television with drums. I mean, almost every group that appeared on those telecasts were with drums. And I think that the drum is kind of that soul beacon. It's a soul instrument. And during a time on Earth that we were going to be going through great changes, personally and planetarily. So the drum became this beacon, and it was seen by the world right away during a subsistence native march here in Alaska, where the elders were trying to keep sustainable fishing in our villages. And the drum was seen by the media, and it launched us on our first world tour. And we've been now touring 20 countries, well over 500,000 miles of the planet, closer to 1 million now, and at least 500,000 people being touched by the drum and its message, which is really coming home to ourselves and coming home to really what our soul purpose is here on Earth, which we've been busy doing other things, of late, of the last 1,000 years or so. So we have to kind of get back on track. And I feel the drum is such an instant messenger. it goes very much directly to the soul and not to the language of the person or the culture of the person, but right down to the soul of the person.
When you said you had dreams in early age, when did your dreams and visions begin for you?
Oh gosh, I probably couldn't really put a date on it, but I was a small child. Probably between the ages of 2 and 6, I had my first visions where I had sort of like angelic beings surrounding me, and this was actually during an incest experience that I had as a small baby, and I started to have visions and out-of-body experiences due to that experience, and successive experiences of that afterwards. So it was really through my pain and trauma that, of course, as many people do in pain and trauma, they exit their body. Or, people have car accidents, they have seen their bodies from above, and it was an experience like that for me. And I began to hear the grandmothers more and more frequently in my 20s, and I sought out some medicine teachers at that point to help me with channeling these beings who were trying to communicate through me and with me on a regular basis. And I started to just get comfortable with one or two, and then as I got more comfortable, others started to come to me. And I had a wonderful Hawaiian teacher who helped me learn how to actually allow those spirit beings to speak through me and to go into trance and become a trance medium. And she was a Hawaiian elder, and she was a beautiful woman. And it began me on a deeper journey with them, where they began to kind of give me more instructions for my life and where my destiny was. And now I call the grandmothers and grandfathers the CEOs or the board of directors of our nonprofit organization, and they guide us in every step of our work and where we're going and what we're doing. So I think we all have this kind of communication. And we start with what we call intuition or gut feeling. And this is our way of connecting to a greater source. And if we spend more time with that in prayer and meditation, we develop these skills and exercise them like any muscle. They become more lucid and more transparent to the spirit world.
And have you always practiced Native American tradition, or were you always part of a tribe, or was this something you learned about later on? Because I know my great-grandfather was Lakota, and I didn't know about that part of my heritage, even though for some reason I always very much identified with indigenous people's beliefs. It wasn't until in my 30s when my grandmother said her father was Native American, which you would never have known because she was as blonde could be. But then had a very, very old picture of when she was just a tiny baby with her father behind her. And even there was such denial that even when I approached my mother about it and I said, oh, why didn't you ever tell me great-grandfather was Lakota? And she said, well, he wasn't. And I said, well, Grandma said, he was, and she said, well, he couldn't have been. He had white hair. And I said, well, of course he had white hair. He was old when you knew him. But I didn't learn until much later that part of my heritage. Did you always know?
No, I didn't, actually, and always drawn to it and didn't find out. I mean, I was practicing it, since I was in my teens and 20s. I was always drawn to it. My first teachers were Native American teachers when I was in my 20s, and then it wasn't until my 40s, well, not 40, I guess it was about 30, late 30s, that I actually realized that I had Native American heritage, and I wasn't surprised by that because my whole life had been it. It was already there, and I think that our blood is our blood, and it has its own knowledge, even when our minds don't know things, and since then, especially with the Drum Project, I have, spent most of my medicine work as, I don't really identify myself in a particular path. My path is a path of love and spirit. But the way in which I like to practice my rituals would be more earth-based spirituality, Native American and indigenous-based spirituality, but global. I spend time with the Peruvian elders. I spend time with the Aboriginal elders, and I'm been passed medicine in each of those areas by the elders to carry on and travel with that particular medicine bundle. So, I really am a very eclectic teacher and use the indigenous wisdom that is really in every spiritual path, whether it's Buddhism, Christianity, or whatever, those core root teachings. But I would say as a teacher, I mostly use the indigenous path and some of the teachings of what we call the four-chambered heart or the red road of the heart to help people to come back to themselves in this time, because there's just such a lot of confusion. We've been in really a numb state for a period of time, and I think it's a collective post-trauma that we experience when we forget who we are. And coming back right now to where we are on the planet, we just are really coming back to being in the present moment. It's been a long time of escaping the present moment. And when we come back to the present moment and receive the present moment as it is, as a silent witness to what it is, then there is no fear and there's no need to project forward and backwards in time, because we have everything we need in this moment. And it's getting people back into that, especially the Western world, who's so future and past oriented, and to really begin to welcome life like all the other animals in the animal kingdom. The birds wake up singing. They don't know where their next meal comes from. This kind of presence, this kind of love to be part of the greater music of life, and the reason why we call the greater cosmos the universe. It means one song, and to find our place in that music. That's all we need to do. It's quite simple, and we're trying to make it very, very complicated.
Yes.
And I think really to come back to being in the moment, to come back to being custodians of the planet. And in indigenous understanding, we have 4 purposes for being on the planet. One is to love, one is to worship, the third is to steward or to caretake the earth, and the 4 is to bring harmony. That's what we're here for, That's our real meaning in life. And when we're not doing those things, when we're not opening the heart in love, when we're not praising, the word worship to me means what you're saying, gratitude, that we're always focusing on what is in life and rather than what isn't. That's praise. That's finding the goodness in everything. That's service. And then we find our particular way to serve the planet. If we are doing work that we don't love, if we are doing things for money, if we are not serving our mission, and we all have an inkling of that. I say to people that come to see me, they'll say, I don't know where I'm going. That's why I'm coming to this session. I want guidance. And, I ask them some questions, and within a few minutes, usually 10 minutes, they do know what to do. They just don't have the courage to do it. And so that's a very different thing than not having the courage to be who you are. We go, well, I got this message, but I don't have the money. I don't know how I would do that. When I received the visions of the Grandmother Drum Project, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what they were getting me into. I had no money. I had no connections, no nothing. And I just kept showing up every day to be guided step by step. If I would have waited till I had $1, then I would have never gotten anywhere. So, and what I could never imagine took place. People sponsored us, volunteers came forward, all sorts of things happened that were so far out of my rational mind that I could not have reasoned my way through. And that's the kind of trust and the kind of surrender that the birds have, And when we live that life, most people say, I live a magical life of synchronicity, where we have moments even of synchronicity in our lives. That's when we're living in alignment.
I was just in Hawaii. It's been about 3 weeks ago now, and I had the most amazing experience. I was at an area called the Place of Refuge, which is a place outside Kona. That
yes, I know it well. Yes.
Yeah, where you could get to, and I hadn't been in the ocean in a significant way, not diving like this, since I was 18 and in the Navy. And we went to this place, and I've always wanted to swim with dolphins, and I would have been happy if there'd been one dolphin 100 yards away. I got in the ocean at two-step, And as you know, having been there, it's a one layer, shallow layer of coral, then it drops off to 30 feet, then it drops off to open ocean. We got out to open ocean, and literally it looked like the sea floor was moving, even though it was so deep, you had no idea how deep it was. And we were surrounded by literally hundreds of wild spinner dolphins. And I swam with them for about 3 hours, and I spent the next week in the ocean just marveling at the abundance and feeling so at home and so embraced that it was very hard for me to return from that. And you touched on moving. You touched on us overcoming our fear, which is one of the core missions of the Just Love movement. Is that we have to stop operating. Not that fear isn't always going to be there in some capacity. It is a tool for us, but it should be just a tool, not a foundation for being. And that's what we've allowed it to become. And you're right. It's about having the courage to step into your truth, into who you truly are. And I'm curious if you've ever had any insight from the spirits, from your guides, as to why we went down this path to begin with. What was the point to this experience that we're now having?
Your symbolic fall from grace, is that what you're kind of implying? I feel that Earth is really our classroom to experience this whole spectrum. And it's our judgment right now that, fear or pain is not a positive thing to go through. And I think that Earth is a place where we really exercise our spiritual power. And to do so, we need some friction. And that builds a muscle. It builds a spiritual muscle like nothing else. And, we have this illusion of separateness and this illusion of death. And all of these illusions actually motivate us into again, it's sort of a friction that makes the pearl. It brings us awake in an experience in a completely different way. And, when you come into this place of really witnessing with life without judgment, I believe that you see the perfection in all of it, in death, in suffering. You see the perfection in all of it. There is no need to change it from this viewpoint, okay, with these glasses. So let's say we're putting on these glasses from this place of power. There's no judgment on those experiences. There's many ways to learn, and I have learned without suffering, and it's been an enormous growth for me. And I have learned through absolute suffering, and that has been exponential growth for me. So I think that it's not for me to interpret that. It's like for each person to experience what they need to experience to wake up to a higher level of consciousness. And I have literally been in near-death experiences in my life, actually probably a person that has had several near-death experiences in one life, through wilderness experiences and last year during a surgery that I had. And so I think that, and I wouldn't have, the grandmothers prophesied that coming for me and said that I would have a near-death experience, but that I would come through it with flying colors. Well, who wants to hear that? Who wants to hear that? I mean, seriously, it's like, now that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And of course, I was nervous ever since they told me that, like what's going to happen. And it was completely a surprise the way it did happen. And yet, when I think about the maybe it was 30 seconds of my life that I had to make a very fast decision to press the emergency button and or else be out. It was a powerful 5 minutes of my life, 3 minutes, whatever it was. I just can't even tell you, what happened to me in those few minutes that has made me the person I am now. And so I have moved away from, we're going to get on this path where there's no suffering. I think that that's part of the learning here, and I don't actually view it as suffering, but as in trials, like in tests, as if you're, getting a driver's test and, you got to go through learning all the different pieces before you get your license. I think that there's just steps we need to take to master a certain level of consciousness to then move on to another responsibility that we have at that different level.
Right.
and that is, sometimes it's just caring for ourselves, or it's caring for a loved one, and we may also be asked to do some major energy work for the planet, personally or collectively, that we're ready for when we step into those next roles, and also in other levels of dimensions. So I think that for me, I view it differently. I view it as not, oh gosh, why did we have to do this? I think it's just all perfectly part of it.
No, and I
just like riding a bicycle, we fell down a few times before we figured out how to balance ourselves.
And I agree, and
that's where we're on the planet.
I agree, and I love the analogy about it takes friction to make the pearl, and I absolutely agree, and we talked about it on the show quite often. I like you, I've had a couple of near-death experiences and suffered great tragedy in my life, and I wouldn't change any of the things that I've gone through, because they've allowed me to be who I am today, and they've given me the great gift of shared experience when I'm trying to help others, to have tremendous understanding that comes from that place of shared experience and empathy and compassion that would be a challenge to have without actually having gone through something similar. And what I was speaking to more directly than the overall, not woe is me, or this is not part of the perfection, but I look at the arc of our species history, and the fact that the indigenous peoples, they did make mistakes before they came to the understanding of being at one with the earth, and having the belief system that it was the chief in the tribe, the elder in the tribe, who had the least, so that the tribe succeeded, unlike Western culture where it's, he who has the most toys is the winner, the best. And there was with Western culture, there was such a, and I don't believe it was planned, but there, if you are stepping back from it, there was an intention to definitely do everything within their power to make sure that those understandings were not carried into the future. And that's why it's really wonderful the work you're doing. But when I was asking about why we're where we're at today, or why we've gone through some of the things we're going through, there was a period when we did have the understandings, and then it seems like we've had to go through it again. And that was more to what I was speaking to, rather than just the overall.
Okay, yes. Well, the elders and most of the prophecies speak about 4 worlds before this world. So the world was sort of created and destroyed more than once. The biblical flood in the Hopi creation story is actually the end of the 2nd world. So we are at the 5th world now, and the 5th world, each of the worlds were destroyed by one of the elements, so that's kind of interesting. And that the 5th world would be destroyed by all of the elements: earthquake, fire, tsunami, everything, which is, of course, what we're experiencing. And the kind of analogy of that is almost related to moving up the chakras. We are in the 5th chakra. We are the planet now of communication, which is the birth of the internet, and all forms of communication of oneness. And in most Eastern spirituality, like Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, that once we get to the heart chakra, and we've raised to the heart chakra, which in the worlds would be the 4th world, we have a chance to go home, meaning we have a chance for full enlightenment. Up until that time, we're dealing with sex, power, and money, really, in the lower chakras, and survival. But once we hit the heart chakra, then we have a possibility of raising our consciousness to full enlightenment, or joining our angelic kingdom in the rest of the cosmos and maturing out of our childhood. So we are now at that place on Earth that we might join a lot of our Star Nation family in their abilities. And that's why we're having visitations from them so much more often now, because we're getting higher in that vibration. We are moving in that direction. And we also could certainly, with our knowledge and ability now, could go absolutely the other direction and can go downward again and do an atomic bomb situation. So we're right at that junction where we're either going to raise up or we're going to plummet. And because we have so much power now, it's like I tell people, we went from 110 volts in the United States to 240 volts in Europe. You put your finger in the socket at 110, yeah, you get zapped a little bit. You put your finger in 240, you're dead, you know. So you got to master that level of power. It's a different thing. If you mess up, you know, you really, we mess up right now on the planet, we can blow something up on a major level. So I think that these rises and falls in consciousness are as natural as breathing in and out. They're as natural as 1 minute you really know the answer, right? Today, this moment, you're answering in love. 10 minutes later, somebody pushes your buttons, you're responding in fear. I don't think the planet's any different as a collective, that we go through remembering and forgetting as part of the awakening process numerous times, you know, thousands of times. And I think the collective is going through rise and fall, and that's been very correlated, Greg Braden's research, with planetary magnetics.
Yep.
When we're in high planetary magnetics, we have a consciousness that's very solid on the planet, very dogmatic, very like the Middle Ages and stuff like that. These were high magnetic times. We're going through dropping of the magnetic field now radically. And this dropping of the magnetic field really loosens up all the belief systems. It loosens up all of the sort of belief that this is a fact, this is just the way it is, to there's many truths. And we start opening up to consciousness rather than belief. And that's the juncture we're at now. So I think it is correlated with a larger system of energy that's going on in the cosmos that's, you know, affects us as well as we affect it. And I think that that's, again, a part of the lessons of rising. Yes, we did achieve high levels of civilization in other times, but I think that a lot of the high levels of civilization that we see on the planet, the remains of, such as Machu Picchu, the Great Pyramids, were not built by us. And we had help and we had intervention. And now it's time that we get there ourselves. We've had a lot of intervention along the way. And our other Star Nation family is watching us, is monitoring us all the time, and is there whenever we ask for guidance. They are there to assist us in moving out of this childhood place of fight or flight. I mean, this is a very rudimentary consciousness. So, you know, they're there 100% to do so as we move forward. And I think that we are moving forward not in a straight line. Just like I used to marathon run, and some days I could run 10 miles, and the other day I thought I never ran before in my life. These are cycles, and that we look at the overall rise rather than the individual moment that's going on.
Right.
That's just part of that, you know, like that friction or that testing time to help us take that higher step. That's really a mastery test.
Yeah, I when we talked on the phone, I shared with you my foundational beliefs from an experience I had with a child. It really begins and sort of ends with infinity, or I should say, doesn't begin or end with infinity. And so I agree that there's literally infinite other experiences, and that to me is what this is really about when people talk about the illusion and that we're experiencing, and people say, well, what is real? And to me, what's real is the experience of the moment. And it's not what, when, where, or why, which are the questions we often ask. And to me, the question we need to be asking ourselves is how? How are you having that experience? And is that are you having the experience the way your heart, your spirit, your soul wants to have, that ideal experience of love, if you will? And the only way that you can do that, it feels like right now that how is happening without us really making a conscious choice. And in order for us to make a conscious choice, we have to make that decision of how before the moment arrives. Otherwise, the decision ends up being made for you. And so to me, it's all about how we're having this experience. And I agree with you that, you know, we could, because I have this sense or relationship with the infinite, I believe, you can live 1 trillion lifetimes and you're no closer to the end of this journey than you are right now. But you said one thing that I thought was sort of fascinating, the sex, money, power thing. I've heard that before. Power and money I get, and the sex thing I definitely get, but I think it's a confusing thing for so many people. I see so many people. In fact, I was with my mother-in-law yesterday at a doctor's appointment, and there was a whole magazine just devoted to how people are experiencing and their relationships and sex in San Francisco specifically. What do you think it is uh, when you talk about the lower chakras? Is because I think a lot of people feel that that's a natural thing that they should be doing, and why is
Oh,
that
of course.
fall in with power and money?
Well, I think, we have to be very, very clear as to how that we use everything. The lower three chakras are our mother chakras. They are, of course, our life on earth that should be in complete harmony. What we've been taught about those lower chakras are really the perversion of those lower chakras.
Right.
And those lower chakras are absolutely essential to our evolution, spiritual consciousness. And I get really, really tired of people that are trying to use the upper chakras only, because they're really negating their feminine energy, and they're negating their connection to the land, their connection to their sexuality, which our connection to our sexuality is our connection to life, period. Sex becomes love, love becomes super consciousness as it races through the chakras. To start, we must be able to love sexually and ourselves and each other, and then as that becomes more perfected, it becomes something that joins with that I'm not trying to get something from someone else, getting love from someone else, validation, and this kind of thing through sexual love, but to give. And once we get that and we're in service to love, then we move on to love. Our sex is no longer sex, it's love. And it's the act of love. And then we move on to superconsciousness. So all of these gateways are perfect as they are. It's just what I'm talking about is really the perversion that we've experienced of using sex, power, and money. As you said, whoever has the biggest toys wins. Well, this is the same. Whoever has the sexual power, sexual manipulation, rape, all these different things are the misuse of these energies. As they are, they're an absolute divinity. In fact, I think if we could really realize that our sexuality is the doorway to our consciousness, and if we practice sacred sex, we would see how amazing our health would be, how amazing our emotions would be, and our spirit, because this is the life force energy. It's based in our genitals. It opens like a flower of light to the rest of our body if we know how to use it. And I think there was, of course, this wave in the 60s of free love, and what we realized that wasn't so free after all. It wasn't really what it was about. It was about a way of loving that was free of give me, give me, give me. And it was a love of giving and a love of pleasure. And this is the kind of service that our sexuality is to our whole being.
Thank you so much. There's a reason I'd wanted that clarified, because I think you're right. Sometimes, as people are trying to reach these higher levels of consciousness, they forget that it's important to stay grounded. And I thought it was important to share that and clarify
Absolutely.
that. And
Absolutely,
it's
because that's key. That's absolutely key. I work with the drum particularly because the drum is at the second chakra. It is dealing with people's issues at the primary level. And I'm telling you, once people have been activated by this drum, 24 hours later, they're either angry or they're crying, or it stirs up a lot of things in the unconscious. And this is what we've dealt with for years. Because I say to people, you can have all these fancy meditations from your mind, but can you be conscious in your first three chakras? These are the challenge to all of us, because they're not as easy. They're our emotional body, they're our physical body, they're our sexual body, and our issues around power and jealousy and all these kinds of things. This is where the real medicine has to be practiced, in my opinion, and how to align these. In the East, of course, Tantra was the study of sacred sexuality. In Native America, we call it Kadosha. And these are the sacred sexual practices, meditations, teachings that help guide our sexual life for it to be aligned spiritually?
I
I'm
agree.
really glad you asked that question.
Well, it's something that I talk about quite a bit with friends, and I've talked about on the show before. It's something that Joseph Campbell really spoke to when he would talk about our loss of our connection to ritual and source. And one of the things that's so important about ritual is not what ritual you practice, but to be mindful of the things that you're doing and why you're doing them. And eating is now, we don't pay homage to the plants, to the animals that give their lives for our bodies and our well-being. It's fast food. It's a perversion, as you so correctly put it. Sex is now pornography. Again, that's fast food for sex. And we've lost our connection to why we're doing these things. We've lost our ritual. We've lost our connection to source. And I thank you so much for explaining that so eloquently.
Oh, well, thank you. And we have no idea, because we've lost so many of these rituals, and teachings. Like, for instance, in Native America, you would have a fireman or a firewoman as a teenager, the opposite sex, somebody that's not related to you, that would actually make love to you and teach you the art of lovemaking. Imagine that. And we have, cultures now that, religious cultures that of celibacy in the church, where it was not, celibacy is something that gets realized at the very end of a spiritual path of awakening, where we no longer so much need the sexual, because we are already one with everything. We just have merged. And we have teachers like that have reached that level. But you don't reach that level by studying in the seminary. You have to go through your own spiritual awakening. And what's happening in that is that then all these perversions are coming out, because it's not a natural evolution. And these people are doing this through repressing their sexuality, which is not the same thing. And when we come to that spiritual path, like the Native Kadosha teachings, where they didn't go away from it, they went straight into it with full consciousness and said, how do we practice this in the highest way possible? And, when my son, in this era, I have a now nearly 30-year-old son, but when he was like 18 years old and he had a girlfriend he wanted to bring back to the house, and I knew he wanted to sleep with her. Well, I could have said, no, you're not doing that. You're my son. You don't do that at your age, or whatever. I invited him to have his girlfriend at the house rather than in the back seat of a car somewhere, because I was going to tell him no as a parent. And I actually bought him Tantra videos. And I said, this is how you need to treat a woman. I mean, I want you to see these films, and I want you to, know something about this, because we don't have the fireman, firewoman anymore, but I needed to pass this on. I bought my son a medicine blanket, which was his first blanket for love. These are the kinds of things that are lost, because we're so trying to keep our kids away from sex when it's the most natural thing that we are, to educate them of the way in which we love, the way in which we treat each other when we come together with each other's bodies and each other's energy fields, and what does this really mean, and how do we give, how do we serve in this place rather than how do we take. And it's one of those things that we're both talking right now at the very root of the problem, because I received guidance when I first did the first world tour. We're bringing it back to the beginning. I was asked to go to Australia and worked with the stolen generation of Aboriginal people. And right when I was going, I knew very little about it at that time, just like it happened in America with our kids being taken here as well. But in Australia, it was going on pretty late into the 70s. And, this kind of thing, they asked me to go and do healing ceremonies between the white and black community and with the stolen generation themselves, which at that point were in their 60s. And I did my first ceremony, and I was told that I needed to do a healing ceremony between men and women. And I thought, oh, okay. They said at the root of all tribal healing is the healing between men and women, the masculine and feminine. That's the war. That's
Boy, do
the
we
root
need
of the
that.
war.
Boy,
And so we did a ceremony where I had all the women on one side of the drum, all the men on the other, And I asked the women to let these men represent their fathers, brothers, uncles, grandfathers, anybody that harmed them, any man that ever harmed them in life, and ask the men to apologize on behalf of all men to the women. And then, that went on for like 10 minutes. I did this whole kind of, call and response. They repeated the prayer after me, and then I switched, and I asked the men to let these women represent all the women in their lives, and their ancestors, anybody that, harmed our ancestors in our own bloodline from the opposite sex. And, there wasn't a dry eye in this cave where we did this ceremony in Australia, and the park superintendent came, and people were melted by this ceremony, and I began to be asked to do that ceremony across the world. And so when you're asking me questions about the first three chakras, it's really about our connection to the planet, which is so lost right now that we're polluting the water we're drinking, and we're not getting that we're connected, and our sexuality, which is number 2, and the third is the misuse of the power.
Isn't it funny?
Power,
Isn't it funny, this loss of connection between the man and the woman and the way that we relate to one another sexually, and how men, the predominantly patriarchal world that we live in almost every faith, including for a time in some sects of Buddhism, it was all about suppressing the woman. And isn't that the same thing we're doing to the planet? We're abusing and suppressing the mother.
Yeah, and this, of course, was a big part of the work that I did even before this. When I was doing my wilderness program for women, I was very involved in the women's movement, and that's what we were saying. It was then called, feminism or deep ecology, and we were saying this. It's the same connection. The connection with what we're doing with the land is the connection to what we're doing with women. It's one and the same. And I believe that there's people that are much more aware of that now. There's a lot of people working on that in their own lives and in the collective matrix of a patriarchal world that's so dominated still. But there's certainly a great change from when I first started, when every woman who did anything for women was a lesbian. Like, you were labeled, you must have been one of those dykes because you were a feminist. And that we're working towards the masculine and feminine now, and putting that in balance is not such a bad word anymore. We were ostracized in the 70s and 80s for those conversations, and now there's a lot more awareness coming, but it's still, there's a lot of work to be done, especially in other countries besides our own, in Australia and South America where I travel, in Israel where I travel. I mean, these things are still in their early stages.
Yeah, there's a show, it just actually ended its season, Mad Men, that's placed in the 60s in the ad industry. And it's really captures a place and a time. And I am so dumbfounded by the way that men treated women, and even in the mid 60s and before that, I've never had it in me to treat women that way. I was always very close to my grandmothers and my mother, and I've just never understood where that rage. It is a rage that some men, and it's less now, but I've never understood where that came from. I know the stories of how at one time it was the women that led the tribes, before the agricultural revolution. And that men then created the myth that she'd given birth to a demon, and that they needed to be strong and protect the tribe from this demon child that the woman had born, and that was really the beginning of all of this. But it just seems so odd and so alien to me. And I know it's all part of the perfection, but it does seem very strange.
Well, I feel, again, with these pendulum swings of consciousness, we've moved to the masculine, to the feminine. Before, cultures that, we know those cultures that were pre-agriculture were mostly goddess-centered cultures, earth-centered cultures, and then we moved to this Aryan culture that is much more masculine, war-oriented culture. So I think we are experiencing, chakra by chakra, trying to balance our chakras, literally, between the masculine and the feminine, as we move through these eras. And I think that it's getting more and more refined now, our challenges, and I can remember, the 70s and 80s and 90s of my experience in working so deeply in the feminist movement and in the empowerment of women, and myself as a woman, what I had to go through as being, a single mother, and also being the youngest woman to climb Denali at 19, and being in all-male environments almost everywhere I went. And in fact, that's really why I began Women of the Wilderness at that time. A woman and I met on Denali. We were the only women we'd ever seen climbing this mountain, and surrounded by men, and we both felt like the men didn't get really who we were and how we wanted to go to the land. It was all about conquering the mountain, it was the same kind of thing.
Right.
And we wanted to sort of smell the flowers along the way. We wanted to connect with the land, and it was more about, they used to call it bagging the peak. I mean, that's a very interesting term when you think about it sexually. And so we couldn't relate to this, so both of us decided to start working together to teach and do programs for women. And even in the first weeks of our class, and we taught at the university, we had the same things coming out of women's mouths, and we never said anything. We just want to smell the flowers. We don't want this to be a physical grunt match up the mountain kind of thing. We want to enjoy ourselves. We want to connect versus conquer. It was all these very, very specific things, and I wound up doing a thesis on it and really learning about sort of the psychology of woman and her connection with the land, and reestablishing that rather than her entering a man's domain. And I think that, in the beginning, a lot of women were like, we want equal rights as men, and I think that's it's really not the point, because it's really about bringing the feminine world to the world, and not this competitive world, but a cooperative world, a world of empowerment for all, a world of connection rather than competition.
Yeah,
So
I often talk
really,
about. I often talk about.
It's a way of
Sorry.
looking at it, really, altogether.
Yeah, I often talk about that if and I think there was a fundamental misunderstanding of Darwin, and a lot of that was sort of brought on by Aldous Huxley and very dark view of humanity. But when you talk about being fit and survival of the fittest, well, to be fit, to my mind, means that you support both the internal and external ecosystems and all the things you need to be fit by making all of those other things fit as well, and that nature and life itself is a process of collaboration with there being some competition, but if everything competed, there wouldn't be anything. There couldn't be anything. And what would you do if the goal is to beat everything? What do you do when you're standing to the mountain, analogy? What if you're doing when you're the last man standing on the mountain alone? What is there for you then? Is that really what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Well,
so what?
Like I said, I think we're, as a collective, we're beginning to see that cooperation actually works better as a global solution. And I think that the internet has brought us a lot of that networking and a lot of connections. Companies are joining together. People are seeing that, the way that nature is it works on that kind of efficiency. It works on synergy. It works on cooperation. It works on connection. It doesn't work on, doing it all by itself. Everything is interwoven, and we already are, and it's just the blind spot. We already are interwoven. We can't really be separate, no matter what we conjure up in our minds. It's not possible. So, it's coming to that, and saying this equality of self, rather than I'm trying to get better than somebody else to get my share. And when we can actually all have plenty, and we can do it together, and it moves us into a much more efficient system, and we can move on from this survival, such as power, free energy. We don't have to spend most of our time working to pay a gas bill or electric bill. We can move on. Let's move on from that. It's just so inefficient, and we can do something for this planet rather than just survive and deplete the resources. I mean, there's a way better way.
Absolutely.
And have way more fun.
Yes.
That's my idea. Like, let's have more fun. This isn't so much fun.
So as we're actually getting down to, believe it or not, we have gone through an hour of show. We've got about 5 minutes left, or a couple minutes before we're going to play your song. Do you have one story from your travels that really touched and moved you, and you saw someone awaken as the drums were being played, and maybe there was a sign of coming to you and giving thanks for awakening something in them? Is there any one story that sticks out to you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think that the most rewarding work that I've done has been in South America and in Israel and in Australia. I guess those I mentioned earlier. I think that getting to work with, we were instrumental in closing a coal mine on Aboriginal lands in Australia. We were instrumental in stopping GMO from coming into Peru with the Peruvian indigenous people. So I think, and people coming up to me and really saying, we're so glad you came here and stood by us with this, and because it made a much bigger public exposure of the issue. It was, wound up being telecast because the drum was involved, because it's quite an item that people are very curious about and want to interview and this kind of thing. And so, but it's the prayer work that we do, and I think that all of us can do this work. Whenever we're doing something for a community, I don't say, like, we don't want the toxic waste on our land, us and them, it's those damn coal mines, I don't get into siding. I get into praying for the highest good, for the land and the people. And if there's a better solution, I'm asking for that. And even though in my heart of hearts I would want a coal mine closed, I don't know what the highest good is. I say constantly during the ceremonies, we bring everybody in to pray. And it's this neutral love that allows things to somehow open. And I think we've seen that happen because when we're with those opposing groups, this is the same thing that's going on with Republican, Democrat. We're splitting the country. We're splitting the energy when we can say, let's all come together for the higher solution.
And why do you go
we do that through prayer.
As I hate to interrupt you, but we're nearing the end of our time, and I want to make sure you get a chance to plug where everyone can find out more about the Whirling Rainbow, and then announce your song, which I picked, your song number 4, which and you'll forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Adama Vishamayam. Would that be correct?
Adama Vishamayam.
Yes, a song to bless us.
Hebrew song.
And they can find more about you at whirlingrainbow.com?
Yes, and we're all over Facebook, Grandmother Drum Project, Whirling Rainbow Foundation, or White Eagle Medicine Woman. They can join the conversation.
Whoa, what is that? Anyway, that was funny. Anyway, well, I just want to tell you how blessed I feel to have had you on the show tonight, and I thank you so much, and hopefully I can have you on again here in the not-too-distant future so we can continue our conversation, because this is wonderful.
Wonderful, and if there's a link to it, I'd be happy to share it.
I will. I'll send you a YouTube link for it.
Wonderful.
Okay, take care. Thank you so much. Just love to you.